People who were in a coma. What was it like from your perspective? Did you know that you were in a coma? So, a friend of mine was in a 6-month coma after an accident. Afterwards, he made sure to tell everyone around him to talk to people in a coma because they can hear you. But he noted that they should always tell the person in a coma what happened, where they are, and what's happening to them because he said that his moments of lucidity were mixed with some truly horrifying dreams, and he had trouble of distinguishing between what was real and what were dreams. He said he just wanted to be told what was real and what was happening. Next story. I was put into an induced coma when I was 9 years old after a pretty bad car accident, which left me with a fractured skull. All I remember is a bad dream about having a bad headache and hearing my older sister telling everyone, including my parents, to get the F out of her way because she wanted to see me. I found out later that this was on the night it happened and they were trying to calm her down before she saw me. Edit. For those who are telling me to let her know how awesome she is, I made sure to. Not quite, but almost hugged the life out of her when she got back from work. Next story. My friend was in a coma about 10 years ago for roughly 3 weeks. Car accident. When he woke up, we visited him, and when I was alone with him, he told me it was like a lucid dream. The real world was gone, and he felt like he was in a world that he could create himself for years. He was dead serious, too. He talked on and on about how he had a slight understanding that he was not in the real world anymore, and that he thought he might be in heaven, about how he felt like he was actually dying, and his last few seconds just stretched on and on forever. He said that's what it felt like. He mentioned that he could fly in the coma dream and that it was amazing. He spent a little while in the hospital, then went home, did physical therapy for about 2 weeks before taking his life with pain pills and vodka. People thought the pain was too much, that it was an accidental overdose, or that the therapy and the accident made him feel helpless and depressed. Honestly, I think he wanted to go back into his lucid dream world. The way he talked about it was like the best thing he ever experienced. Next story. I don't know. I was in a coma for 11 days, severe brain injury. I don't remember being in a coma or waking up from one. I lost several years of memories prior to the coma, and my brain didn't really start to retain information again until around 6 weeks after I came out. I'm told that my personality changed afterwards as well. I had to rebuild most areas of my life. It sucked, but it was probably a good thing. Although I'd be lying if I said I'd never wondered what my life would be like if I'd never had that coma. Next story. After being in a really bad accident that left one of my good friends, the driver, brain dead, they put me into a chemically induced coma for under a week to prevent brain damage due to swelling. When I first woke up, my memory was much better than it was as it gradually faded in the days to come. I have a journal my mother recorded things in, and I recalled many things I shouldn't have been able to immediately after waking up. Today, I have little memory of it at all, but I can definitely say that having positive people around you definitely helps when you're in a situation like that. If you have a friend in this situation, don't disregard them. Even though your life has moved on, they may wake up one day, and in their mind, not a day has passed since that last conversation they had with you.
Hello, everybody. I would just like to say, I don't know when this video is going up, but I'm recording this the day or the day after we got monetization back, so I am in a very good mood. We recorded a few videos while we were in that awkward phase fighting YouTube, but this is the one I'm recording after Undersparked has been remonetized, and we can start making that bread again, you know what I mean? Because we love you guys, but also, I got bills to pay, and so do the other narrators. But anyway, guys, I'm so happy. Anyway, next story.
So, I was out for 45 days. No white light, no tunnel, nothing. Woke up and couldn't remember who I was. For 6 months, never really fully recovered, so I just started life again. Turns out I'm a completely different person than I was, and that is a really good thing. I get memories now and then, and they aren't pleasant. A woman came by and sat by my bed for 6 weeks. Turns out she was my ex-lover. I couldn't remember her. I didn't recognize my mother either. Then, afterwards, this is the second time in my life I have related this much about my life publicly, and it has been good, and at the same time, really painful. Thanks to everyone for being kind. I wrote this story 7 months ago and published it in the lounge, and I really hurt myself doing it. This time, I wanted to share about the life afterwards, and I hope it has been of some benefit to others that struggle with mental issues. This place, it saves lives. It gives hope and guidance to millions of people, and I feel lucky to be a part of the community. Next story. I'm not sure where I read it, but a girl talked about her experience, and she mentioned that it was like going in and out of sleeping/dreaming. Just when she would feel like she was waking up, she could hear parts of conversations or the TV, but she would slip right back into sleeping. She also said when people would clean her, she could feel them touch sensitive parts of her like her armpit and butthole area. I'm an inpatient phlebotomist, and even though some of my patients are sedated, I still always introduce myself and say I'm here to draw some blood, just in case they could hear me. Next story. My girlfriend of 6 years and sort of fiance was in a severe car crash when she was 16. Both her best friends died instantly. She was the only survivor, but they didn't think she would make it. She was in a coma for 9 months. She was in what is called a waking coma. She retained normal periods of sleep and open-eyed wakefulness, but no higher brain functions. And here are some things about her experience. She doesn't have any memories of the year prior or the year and a half-ish after her coma, and obviously no memories of the car crash. She suffered a TBI, and when she first got out of the coma, she would get naked and sexual with people, and angry very easily. These are common problems of people who suffer a TBI. She went back to school after the coma, but her brain was still healing. A lot. She was held back another year because her brain was still not retaining anything. But today, she is a wonderful, bright 30-year-old with a college degree. She has a slight speech impediment, gets frustrated easier than most, and it took her a while to get driving down. Honestly, she still scares the hell out of me when she drives, but there are worse drivers out there. Next story. I was in a coma for about 2 weeks, following a cardiac arrest as a teenager. I was technically dead for over an hour. In fact, people often ask me if I could hear my own family talking to me or if I was dreaming, but the answer, it's no. There was a huge hole in my memory beginning about 2 weeks before the coma through a week after waking up. And waking up is in quotes because I would wake up, ask a bunch of semi-incoherent questions, fall back under, then wake up again and ask the exact same questions in the exact same order. Repeat 6 or 7 times. Then the coma was not even blackness, it just does not exist. I remember having the hardest time believing it was actually mid-October, when the last day I remembered was late September. Next story. My mom was in a coma and she recently told me it was horrible. She was in a wreck that killed her technically 5+ times, heart stopped, and she said she could feel all of the pain, hear the doctors yelling that she was being coded. She said she thought to herself, wow, whoever that is must be dying, and then realizing it was her. She was trying to scream and tell them she was alive, but nothing ever came out. And also for clarification, when I said she was clinically dead 5 times, I was just detailing the severity of the situation. She was in a coma right after that for a really long time and described the coma, the inability to scream, hearing people, pain, etc., from while she was in the coma. Next story. Yeah, how I ended up dead is kind of a long story, but anyways, I had gone to bed one night and I hadn't been feeling well for a couple of weeks. Thought it would go away eventually. I remember feeling confused and somewhat found myself in a dreamlike state, although I was pretty lucid in it as well. There was quite a bit of psychedelic-like experiences, and it felt like such a long dream. It just kept going on and on. I didn't have a body anymore. And I actually asked myself, am I dead? Since this couldn't be a dream, usually when I become aware of dreams, I wake up. And I wasn't waking up. It felt like it went on for so long. But what was going on, this part I had no recollection of, I guess somewhere or sometime in my sleep, I had stopped breathing. I may have had a seizure at some point, and I was pretty lucky family had stopped by the house to check in on me. They noticed my car was still in the driveway, which meant I wasn't at work, and I wasn't getting the door. But looking through the window, they could see me just laying there, in bed, not moving. I wasn't responding either, so they went through a window, and I was unresponsive. 911 was called, etc. I believe it took them a couple of hours trying to get me back and keep me stable, but my lungs weren't working, so they had to intubate, and I was in a coma with life support, all that fun stuff for about 2 days. They ran a bunch of tests, I don't remember, getting a spinal tap or catheter or all the IVs and blood draws, etc. I was still pretty much in the other place for a long time. It felt like I was traveling through space or something. I saw and experienced a lot of amazing things that I can't explain or remember well anymore, but I did try to write down some of it later. I wasn't scared. It felt like a really long journey. I didn't necessarily see anyone for a while, but I didn't feel alone. I felt the presence of others. It was like I was around everyone I ever knew or something. It felt quite familiar in a way. There was this black, infinite darkness, and it was the most wonderful thing. It was like I could create experiences with my imagination. There was no sadness, it was all bliss without worry, and it was very hypnotizing. I really considered letting myself go into it, just letting go. My lungs were not kicking in on their own. If they had not, then I'm told I could have stayed dead, or been paralyzed, or ended up a vegetable. However, I didn't want to let go though. I have a daughter who is my world. She was just about a year old at the time. and I kept thinking of her and her mother. It kept me from just letting go into that peaceful bliss. I couldn't leave them. I did get some of that life flashing before you type of experience. It looked like a projector was cast a bit in front of me and kind of like a movie, but I didn't see myself or anything like that. What I saw was almost like memories, except I hadn't had these yet. I saw my kiddo and her mom, maybe because I'd been thinking of them a lot, and they were smiling and happy. My daughter looked a couple of years older in that vision, though. There were a few visions, but all I saw was them, and I remember it making me feel quite happy. I would have smiled and cried if that had been possible. After that, it was getting quiet and dark. I remember it was all black. I didn't know how to get back, though. Black, the darkest I've ever seen, and felt so empty. Not scary, but I was in some infinitely large void. Time wasn't really a thing, but I was just sort of there for a good while. I remember seeing a tiny little dot of light so far away, just a little, and it was the only thing different from the blackness. Then I felt I was falling towards it or being pulled by some force. It felt like I was traveling very fast, like through space again, but it still took quite a long time, and the little thing got larger and larger as I got closer. It was the size of the moon eventually, and I just kept falling towards it. Eventually, when I got close enough, it felt like I was thrown back into myself with really great force. The white was blinding, and as I was back in, all my field of vision was initially incomprehensible. But the light died down, and I was able to make out shapes, etc. I was still comatose. I couldn't move or speak or anything. I saw what looked like a hospital room, and at this point, I still was not sure if this was real or not. No way. No, but this can't be a dream, though. They don't last this long and don't feel this real. The world, it still didn't make sense either. I thought I had died and gone to hell or something, and I'd spend eternity trapped in my body, unable to move or do anything. I could hear sounds. I saw a clock on the wall, and I'd look over, but the time seemed all wrong, or it would jump around. There was a board on the wall with writing, but it made no sense. A window, a tiny window on the left side, the only window to the outside, but all I could see was a brick wall, and a TV playing some nature stuff that really freaked me out. I couldn't see people for a while, which had me questioning reality. I'd see nurses kinda go past, but they didn't seem real at all. Almost not even three-dimensional and choppy, unrealistic movement. They'd pass by, but it was almost like no one really noticed me. I knew it was real. Well, either I was in the hospital or I was dead or in some sort of hell. But everything was becoming more detailed as time went on. I could read the board. People looked a lot more real. I felt the breathing tube in my arms had been restrained so I wouldn't tear it out if I woke or something. I still couldn't talk or move or do anything though. I remember seeing some family and friends asking me to wake up, crying, telling me a lot of things, holding my hand, and I couldn't do anything. That was the worst part for me, seeing how hurt they were, crying and telling me I had to fight. I had to start breathing on my own soon. I couldn't cry. I was trying to yell, but nothing. I couldn't grasp their hands. Time was weird. I don't know how much passed or whatever in between the several moments I do remember. I know eventually I was by myself again. A doctor came in, and I guess I had regained a little movement and my lungs finally kicked in. She took out the breathing tube. It was bugging me when I had started to be able to move a little, and took the catheter out as well. I didn't feel it. Family was able to come in an hour or two later. I could hardly talk, just barely move hands, arms a little, turn my head a little bit. I developed the worst migraine I've ever known, worst pain I've ever felt, and that carried on for about a week, non-stop. I did get to hold my baby eventually, and I have a picture of that somewhere. I don't know where I got the strength, but I picked her up and I smiled, hugged her. After I lost all my strength again, took a while, but I got to talk to a lot of people and doctors. In the following days, etc., slowly recovering. But in that time, I couldn't really eat. I basically had water when possible. I couldn't keep food down for at least a week, or sleep. I slept once for 30 minutes or so, but I felt the pain all the way through. Probably by day 3 or 4, I was able to start getting up and walk to the bathroom, etc. I was hospitalized for about a week before I could go home. This was a year ago, and I'm still trying to get past this experience. I suppose I developed PTSD, and my anxiety got so bad in the following months, going into full-blown agoraphobia. I had insomnia really bad for a while. I still do, actually. For about a month, I had nightmares about hospitals and feared that I would stop breathing if I fell asleep. uncontrollable crying and broke down a lot when I had first came to and for a good while after. I felt guilty because I missed being on the other side and had really considered just letting go into that amazing bliss, that peace. I missed it, and at times wished I had just stayed there. I left out a lot, but that's all I could get down at the moment. Next story. I was in a medically induced coma following a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I don't remember much, but my family described moments of me appearing to be awake. Most notable, an apparent attempt at humor. Apparently, they put these mitts on my hands to prevent me from ripping my ventilation tubes out over and over, but I pretended they were lobster claws. I have no recollection, but it's a real me move.
OP, I would just like to say, I'm there with you, bro. I want to have lobster claws just for a day, maybe a few, not even for a day, but like a few hours, just a couple of minutes. So yeah, lobster. Let me stop. Anyway, next story.
So I know this will get buried, but I'll post my experience anyway. I went to the hospital with renal failure and a pulse OX reading of 32. I remember the nurse saying my pee looked like root beer, and when she stabbed my arm to give me an IV, all she said was, "Uh-oh." My arm? It got really warm, and my dad moved my head so I wouldn't see how much blood was coming out. Next thing I know, I'm in a hospital bed, tearing through the desert at 60 miles an hour, nothing but me and a hospital bed. No motor, nothing, just cruising through the desert. I'd see all sorts of weird things, most specifically was Ronald McDonald. I saw him all the time. Then my hospital bed would come to a screeching halt and I'd be in the living room of someone I knew. Grandma, good friends, former coaches. Basically any living room I had spent time in with someone I cared about. The weird thing was the living room walls were always three-walled. One wall was missing, and beyond that wall was a barren desert. We would talk for a while about God knows what, then I'd be pulled back into the desert cruising at 60 miles per hour again. It happened over and over again. Sometimes the same living rooms would reappear, but almost all of them were unique. When I came out of the coma, everyone kept commenting how good my hair looked. I couldn't figure out why they kept saying that, so I finally asked my mom how long I'd been sleeping, and she said 13 days. And I had cards and flowers from all these people whose living rooms I'd been visiting in my coma. It was surreal, and I definitely can't explain it, especially since most of the cards came from people who weren't allowed to visit me in intensive care, and were sending well wishes in writing, not in person. Next story. Oh, I can answer this one. I was in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks, about 3 months ago. I had open heart surgery, it didn't go well. Had trouble coming off the ventilator, so they just put me in a coma to try to give me time to heal. I had nightmares the entire time from the medicine they were using to knock me out. I thought I had been kidnapped by a nurse and was a victim of trafficking. I thought my drug-addicted aunt had her friends rob my sister and her husband, killing my brother-in-law and one of their children, and I thought I was constantly being grabbed by people under my bed. It was not fun. I can't say that I knew I was in a coma or anything. I'm usually one of those people that when I have a bad dream, I can tell myself it's just a dream and wake myself up in order to end it. But this was not like that. I was convinced it was all really happening. Next story. One time, I overdosed on meds and alcohol while in my locked room and woke up shortly afterwards, finding myself in my bed with my 2 housemates next to me, freaking out. I was so irritated that I didn't die that I immediately got out of bed and shoved both of them away and stormed out the door without my phone or my watch or wallet. I then did some dumb crap outside and cops took me to a mental hospital. It wasn't until the doctor told me the date that I did realize I'd actually been in a coma for like a week. Till this day, I'm still not sure how long I was out for exactly. So the coma felt like nothing. It felt like I somehow lost consciousness, fell asleep, and woke up shortly after. I didn't know I was in a coma until after the doctor told me. Next story. 3 weeks at the age of 7. I had no idea and would have these blips through time, but everything was wonky. We hit a tree, doing 90 miles per hour after our brakes gave out at the top of a mountain. I could hear the doctor, and there's this image that looks like there's pictures, but I don't see them in any physical manner, if that makes sense. They were octopus head people and had these crazy shapes everywhere that would fall into themselves and repeat. I think I may still have some lingering brain damage. I'd scream, I'm dead, in my head, and this warm glow would tell me, it's okay, you're here now. I have no idea where there was, but it was pretty comforting. I felt like I was on a cloud and I was weightless, zipping around everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. As I get older, I forget more and more, and my head is screaming at me not to forget, like it was something important to remember, and I get angry because I can't remember that shape or that face or that place. I often get scared and wonder, am I going crazy? I'll see a light zip around me and leave this burning trail in the air. Or I'll see the blood vessels in my eyes and these balls of light that pulsate with my heartbeat. I'm super sensitive to electricity pulses, and sometimes I swear I see them in the air. I don't know if anyone else has had a similar experience. I don't claim to know the answers of the universe, but I feel like that place is somewhere we can or do go. It's just so different, and I don't know how to describe it. Next story. This is really bizarre, but my uncle, a very serious, strict, and rather dry man, had an accident and went into a coma a few years back. He never believed anything he couldn't touch, no talks about souls or anything similar. He was in a coma for a few weeks until he woke up and had this crazy AF story. He said he saw himself in a bubble, floating around in a white place, and it was peaceful and beautiful. But then he said about other bubbles he could see around him. All of them had other people in them. He distinctly remembered a black-haired woman singing in the bubble closest to his until one day her bubble bursted and she disappeared. When he woke up, he could give a very clear description of her body, her age, all of that. Now, the crazy bit? There was a woman one floor below him in a coma that sadly passed away before he woke up. You guessed it. Black hair, age, body, all correct. He had never met or seen this woman in his life. His whole idea of life changed after this. It still makes me think sometimes, where was he? He thinks all the people in the bubbles around him were patients in the same hospital. Could it be? We'll probably never know.
So, all of these stories lean towards the spiritual side. But this one, guys, I don't have words for these stories, and they just make me feel a certain way. And I'm curious if any of you watching this have ever been in a coma, if you've experienced anything or nothing or what. I think the ones that scare me the most are the people who forget their lives and it doesn't come back to them, and then they come back completely different people. That is scary. What if I went into a coma, came out and said, I don't want to be a voice actor anymore? That's like half my identity. The other half is like being really fashionable for a straight man, so much so that people think I'm gay, but then I surprise them because I'm actually straight. But oh my God, that would be half my identity gone to the coma, and that can't be, we can't allow that. Anyway, next story.
So, my brother-in-law was in a coma for a month after a car accident in which he lost his eye and almost died. He said that he had a vision of God holding him underwater 3 times, almost drowning him the 3rd time, then him giving up and finally being led up into his hometown. He's had one almost fatal car accident after that, and while I'm not superstitious, I do believe sometimes reality can echo the future in ways which our minds can perceive sometimes, even if we can't fully interpret those echoes. Well, I simply believe he's eventually going to have a 3rd accident, and I fear for him. Next story. Was in a coma for 3 weeks. During that time, I was definitely aware of people around me, of being in pain, and also, at the same time, I had an alternate reality where my entire reason for returning to my life revolved around the knowledge that it was my turn to take care of a Native American woman I had never met, but whom I would meet in the future, and that I would need to recover for this reason. When I woke up, I actually pulled out all of my tubes and tried to leave to start helping this person who lived where, I don't know. Help her how? I don't know. I thought I was on a reservation somewhere in Oregon, but was in fact in the city, at a very busy, huge hospital right in the middle of town. I've kinda always been looking for her ever since. Next story. I was in a coma for a week. I don't remember anything, and it took 2 to 3 weeks after I woke up to understand it was a car accident that put me there. I told everyone my husband and I had collided skiing, which did happen but certainly didn't cause any injury. I finally understood that we had had a head-on collision with a logging truck. It took another 3 years before I felt like myself again. Crappy time. But that was back in 2001, and my husband and I are still married. I've read that when one partner gets a brain injury, 90% of marriages fail as a result. And true or not, I'm still proud of us. Next story. My brother was in a coma for a few months due to collapsed lungs. I live in Michigan and he lives in Las Vegas. And on Christmas, I flew out because they said he wasn't going to make it. Anyways, his wife and I spent the entire time in his hospital room talking and whatnot. few months later, he wakes up and tells his wife that he remembers hearing me visit. However, he said he felt like he was trapped and buried alive. He couldn't move or talk but could hear us, and he was terrified. This was 5 years ago, and he still has trouble sleeping because of the nightmares. He said they replay over and over in his head every time he goes to sleep. He also can't sleep in his bed and will sometimes sleep on the floor or the couch because it reminds him of the hospital bed. He doesn't like to talk about it at all. And we also had a friend who passed away during the time he was out, and he said he remembered having dreams about him as well, and they haunt him because he never got to say goodbye. Definitely PTSD from that situation. Next story. Maybe this is a story of coincidence, or maybe there are certain memories or stimulation which can force you out of certain states? Who knows? It would be truly interesting if we could have a functional MRI recording of his brain during the entire coma just to see what the difference was. This is a true story. When my dad was dating my mom in high school, he would visit her at her grandparents' home. Her mom's parents also lived there, and he would always talk to my great-grandfather who was named Dave. Dave's favorite word was bullcrap, and would call him bullcrap and everything bullcrap. My dad would mess with him by giving a big kiss on the cheek when he wasn't paying attention, and he would have been in his mid-70s at the time. My dad was 17. 20 years later, Dave is not doing well at 96 or so and ends up in a coma. He is unresponsive for several days, but still alive. My dad goes to visit him and gets up in his face and started yelling, "Bullcrap, Dave!" and gave him a big kiss on his cheek. Dave woke up from his coma. Just like that, everyone was speechless, except for Dave, who called him bullcrap. He lives for a few more years after that. Great man, illiterate till the day he died. Dropped out of high school in the 2nd grade to work on a farm. Did not get drafted in World War II because he worked on railroad engines, and we'll never forget him. Also, I made this account so I could share this one story. This thread is great, and thank you everyone for sharing. Also, not sorry for the cursing because, well, Dave never was. Next story. I was in a coma for about 2 days when I was 22. I have Crohn's and had been in a severe flare for a few weeks prior. Lots of blood loss, unable to eat, dehydrated, etc. I fell asleep on my parents' couch. The next thing I remember is waking up in the ICU and thinking about how I needed to use the restroom. Since I had no idea what happened or where I was, I just got up, or tried to anyway, and all the machines went off and a nurse came running into the room and told me to sit down. I don't remember anything that happened during the coma. No dreams, no sense of time moving, just like a dreamless sleep. Apparently, though, I was able to do basic commands in the coma, like a doctor told me to open my eyes so they could take my contacts out, and I'd squeeze a hand if told to, but otherwise, I didn't move or respond to anything. I don't recall any of it, though. Doctors think I went into this coma as a way to preserve energy, to keep me alive. I had to get 5 pints of blood and had IV drips in both arms while I was out. And it's weird to think about how it happened while I was there, and yet I have no memories of it. Next story. I was in a coma from December 31st, 2016 to January 3rd, 2017, so 4 days total. It was like being asleep or under anesthesia for me. I don't recall any dreams, nor was I aware I was in a coma. I only realized I was in a coma when I woke up in the hospital's ICU on life support. Some people have asked me if I was afraid of falling asleep after being in a coma, but I wasn't since my coma was self-induced. Self-unaliving attempt via medication overdose. My GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale, it was a score of 3, which I believe is the lowest number on said scale. One of the first responders, a captain of my city's fire department, told me I was so close to death that I was knocking on heaven's door, he said. I think the captain was right since I knew the amount of medication I ingested would be enough to cause me to be in a coma within 5 minutes and dead within 30 minutes. My medical records say I must have lost consciousness very quickly since they found me on the floor with my phone still in my hand while barely breathing. Next story. I'm a nurse in a neurological ICU. All of us are taught that it is possible for comatose patients to still be cognitive despite their obvious inability to communicate. It's standard and well-known practice of effective nurses and other healthcare team members to always discuss the plan of care and constantly reorient patients, despite their neurological status, whether the patient is merely confused with a GCS of 14 or in a coma. And for thought's sake, imagine being stuck, being pinched, being catheterized, feeling IV infusions, feeling BP cuffs and SCDs constantly inflate, deflate, hearing alarms and voices. Doors are always open in ICUs also. Imagine being touched at least hourly, being exposed for assessments, not knowing where you are or what day it is or who's around you, being in unreportable pain, etc. And no one explaining what's happening, why, or when. A nightmare, counterintuitive to healthcare, and a violation. I don't know if all patients in comas are aware or even any bit cognitive, but it's our duty to treat every single one of them like they're human, because they are. If you haven't heard many stories, both good and bad, please just YouTube some and keep reading comments here, of course. If you're in healthcare, they're great reminders, but regardless, they're intriguing and frankly amazing. A big thank you to everyone who has experienced a coma or anything like it for sharing your story and giving the rest of us knowledge of such a phenomenon. It is so good to hear patient experiences and wonderful that they are in the past. Next story. Well, I definitely have an experience with this that I wish I didn't. Typing from mobile, so this may be a bit rough, but I have a pretty severe asthma, and we were detail cleaning the house upon my 3-day-old daughter's homecoming from the hospital. During the process of cleaning, something heavy was thrown into a trash can I was standing over that seemed to be empty. That is what got to me. A cloud of dust and dirt and gunk flew up right into the air, right into my face, and instantly triggered the most severe asthma attack I have ever had in my life. I immediately took my rescue inhaler, and it did absolutely nothing. I managed to get my nebulizer and start a treatment, but started shaking and having spasms so badly it looked like I was seizing. My parents were helping clean, and by this time they had run into my room. I looked right at my mom and said, "Mom, I'm dying." And they called 911, and I very rapidly watched the world close in around me like it was getting smaller as I suffocated. They tell me I made it down the stairs into the yard before I passed out, but I don't remember doing so. My mind shut off at the top of the stairs. Fast forward 16 hours and the world suddenly turns back on, but not entirely. I could not think, I could not move, I could not speak. There was nothingness, but not even a cognitive nothingness, just a void. I felt tugging on my body all over, like something was just pulling on me at every part of my body. After what seemed like an eternity of this, cognitive thoughts started to come back in my mind, and it was only one thing. Where is my baby? I was searching for her in the void. It wasn't dark, it wasn't light, it was nothing. I feel like I searched for her for thousands of years, never making any progress and never processing any other thoughts. Suddenly, a switch flipped, off to on, and all my thoughts came back to me. The panic intensified of wanting to find my daughter even more, but then my eyes finally opened, and I could see my family all around me in the emergency room. I had no idea what happened. I couldn't speak. I had been intubated and machines were breathing for me, keeping me alive. I learned I had been in the void for 15 hours, in a coma. This hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't think straight and I couldn't communicate. I know basic sign language and started frantically trying to spell out, "Where is my baby?" but nobody could understand me. Everybody is freaking out because they had been told there was a chance I was never going to come back. And then suddenly, there I was. They managed to get me a marker and some paper to write on it where I immediately wrote the question I had been thinking of the entire time I was gone. Where is my baby? What happened? I had no memory of what happened and did not even know I was gone. They explained again what happened and told me I was on a pretty heavy dosage of drugs, including ketamine. I began to feel extremely disassociated with my surroundings and thought I should still be dead. Legitimately thought I didn't belong in the land of the living and wanted to go back to the void. I learned later this was called a ketamine hangover and it lasted for hours. They also told me I had to be defibrillated during transport to the hospital because I had flatlined on the ride over. I then spent 6 days and 7 nights in the hospital with pneumonia in my lungs and stubborn spotting on my lungs that did not go away until the very end of this day. I was miserable, but I was alive and ready to get home to my baby. My last thought before my consciousness faded was, my daughter is going to grow up and never see me. I will die, and she won't even remember me. And this incident has caused extreme PTSD for me, and has caused an extreme fear of that switch going off again, like I know it someday will for good. But that's the funny part to all of it for me, though. Once it's off, it will no longer matter to me, but every single day of my life, what happened haunts me and terrifies me that it will happen again. It's been a little over a year now since the accident, and I think about it every day. I totally understand why people say they had visions or saw God when they have an experience like this, because I truly believe that your mind jumps to its ultimate comfort and last thoughts when it does. That's just my experience. Sometimes it feels good to talk about it, but it's extremely difficult to do so. Thanks for reading if you stuck around.
So, really quick, OP said something that stuck with me when they said, "I truly believe that your mind jumps to its ultimate comfort and last thoughts when it does." That's really intriguing. I might have to think about that as we continue throughout the course of this video. I wonder if the disposition or the mindset or beliefs of that person and their perhaps emotional and mental stability has anything to do with this. I would assume so. Like, if the heart and mind are in balance, like, do you see something beautiful? I don't know. This is very peculiar. This is intriguing. I'm gonna have to sit and think on that one. Let me know what you guys think. But anyway, next story. Well, I was in a coma for a few weeks. It was crap. It was like being in a nightmare. A lot of darkness, voices, flashes of images. No real cohesion or comprehension, but a bad feeling and confusion hung over the consciousness I had. The transition to being awake was similarly disturbing and very difficult for me to distinguish from the comatose state. I needed a lot of feedback about where I was, what was happening, how much time had passed. My family weren't there, so I assumed I was still unconscious. And this was part of the bad dream. Took me almost a week to see a familiar face and put it all together. It took years to come back from that. Mentally, the sense of dark uncanniness stuck with me for a long time. Probably only a year to recover physically, though. Next story. I don't know if this was a brief coma, a stretch of unconsciousness, or they just kept me in some kind of sleep state while I recovered, but I tried to unalive myself 2 years ago with a lethal dose of medication that I was on at the time. Happened on a Friday. My heart rate was at 198 for a few hours, and I was talking the whole time, and they kept pumping sedatives into me trying to get my heart rate to go down, but it wasn't working at all. They told my dad they were expecting me to go into cardiac arrest at any second. Then blackness, and I assumed I fell asleep. When I woke up, was sent to the psych ward and assumed it was only maybe 8 hours later. It was completely disorienting to learn it was Tuesday. It wasn't until the day of my release that they told me I very nearly didn't survive. Spent those days in the ICU. They told my dad not to expect me to wake up. Next story. 3-month coma here. I did know I was in a coma, but had no sense of time. I had some minor awareness of what was going on around me, sort of the inverse of a dream. Speaking of dreaming, I learned lucid dreaming. I remember using Legos to build walls against the pain. I remember alternating between feeling like I was freezing and on fire and used my newfound lucid dreaming powers to try to mitigate those feelings. I remember writing a book in my mind and visualizing it like a movie as I wrote it. I remember the tears of my wife and hearing her cry and talking about how she was running out of strength. I remember wanting to comfort her. I remember wanting to tell her about the book I was working on. Eventually, when I came out of it, the next 6 months were hell. I had no appetite, but somehow gained 40 pounds pretty quickly. It felt like my whole nervous system was off by a millimeter and had to relearn touch typing. I've never recovered the energy I had before. I lost the ability to lucid dream. It'll happen sometimes, but very rarely. I held on to the details of the book in my mind for about 2 days, which wasn't nearly long enough to write it all down, especially since I had to relearn touch typing. There were times in that first 6 months I wished I was back in the coma. And that was 3 years ago, but I only have about $30K of debt left. I'll never be able to buy a house. Due to the debt, I lost my security clearance, which cut off my entire career track. I still feel bad for my family having to go through it, but I think it made us closer. I'm happier with what I have and grateful for the small things in life, which is fortunate because beforehand I was very driven and ambitious, but now I'm more cautious than reserved. Me of 3 years ago wouldn't like me now. He'd think I gave up and should work harder for more tangible success. Current me is happy with the love and the loyalty of my family, though. But sometimes, though, I miss the ability to create fully fleshed out worlds in my mind. Next story. I was hit by a speeding car back in March of 2005 in front of my high school. Doctors told me that paramedics said I walked on my own into the ambulance. I was told I suffered from TBI, traumatic brain injury, due to a fracture in the base of my skull. Because of the swelling into my brain, doctors had put me into comatose and a hole was drilled into my head where my forehead meets my hairline. I woke up sometime in April and had to relearn how to eat, how to talk, and how to walk, kind of like someone gave my brain a hard reset. But to answer your question, I remember my entire life before the day of the accident, and I remember waking up from comatose 4-ish weeks later, and I remember nothing else. Next story. Was in a coma for a month from Christmas to the beginning of February 2011 to 2012. I definitely could hear my family talking to me, not always decipherable, sometimes just murmurs. It definitely felt like I was a ghost. Had an out-of-body experience as well, at least that's what it felt like. I could hear the doctors and the panic when I was bleeding/flatlined for a moment. I was in a white room with a window to my right, a figure in the corner, and people always running by the window. I could feel myself wanting to be helped and had woken up, but no one could hear me or help me. Next story. When I died on an operating table of a stroke, it felt relaxing passing. It was confusing and painful dying. Almost euphoric, though, the sensation of literal nothing. No worry, sensation, or concern. But then I remember coming back. The sudden sensation of touches and drowning. I was in a tunnel swimming forward with what seemed like thousands of hands grasping at me.
I finally reached an end with what my mind said was the destination. There were two individuals relaxing, one leaning against the air, another lying down on what appeared to be a horizontal wall. Both acknowledged me, and the one lying down acted surprised and said something to the effect of, "How in the hell did you get here? You're here way too early." He put his hand on my forehead and pushed back and said, "Back you go." The next thing I remember was waking up on the operating table screaming incoherently, pulling out my IVs. The staff came running, pinned me down, and then put me into a coma for over a week. The coma might have been the worst part since it felt like my imagination was toying with me for what felt like forever. But that's a whole other story. I was more afraid to fall asleep when I woke up, as there were a few dozen incidents where my mind tricked me into believing I was awake during the coma. So for close to a year afterwards, I would find myself questioning if what I was experiencing was a trick or not. I think what made it worse was that perception-wise, it felt like I was in the coma longer than I was alive, and most of it was stored along with my memories. It took a while for my mind to distinguish what happened wasn't real. Then the individuals relaxing, the one standing looked almost roguish and seemed completely uninterested with my presence. But the one who pushed me had an unremarkable face, looked husky and out of shape. The coma was a bit more scarring since my imagination or my mind kept me shuffling around different scenarios. The majority all negative, from a quadriplegic scenario in 4D to SA, parental abandonment, water torture, or vivisection. I almost forgot the cathedral with shadow creatures against the wall discussing whether or not to devour me. Next story. At age 18, I didn't think my life was going anywhere, so I took as many pills as I could find and fell asleep in the woods. I thought for sure I had died, but I was found and laid in a coma for 3 days. I remember at one point becoming partially conscious. I knew I had a body. It was laying down, but I couldn't see it or move it. Everything I saw was gray and foggy. I couldn't talk. I was trapped. While in the coma, I actually believed I was in hell, being punished for trying to take my own life. My mom told me, though, that I had the biggest smile when I woke up. I was thankful to be alive. Looking back, I think I may have been seeing some bright lights through my eyelids, but I'm glad it was just a coma either way. If anyone is thinking about taking their own life, get help. I've had depression all my life, and it sucks. But believe me when I say that life is worth it. Please don't suffer in silence. Next story. I was out into a coma to recover after a bad car accident when I was 15. I didn't know I was in a coma or where I was in general. It all seemed like a dream. I had many out-of-body experiences where I saw myself and people in the room. It was strange. I would be in the dream, but then wake up and do normal things, have conversations with people. It was only after I talked about it I realized I was reliving the couple of days before the car accident. And when I was sleeping, it was me being OOBE. I remember seeing things from the third person. I now dream in third person when I dream myself. Next story. I was put into a coma for 20 days by swerving my car into a random tree on the side of the road because I hallucinated my dad, who was very abusive towards me and my mother, standing in front of it. While in a coma, I was confronted by all of my emotions. They were able to talk to me and I to them. They showed me visions of my past when I was various ages that ranged anywhere from happy and jovial to sad and traumatic. With their help, I was able to sort out what had happened, make peace with those who had wronged me in the past, including my own wife and best friend, as well as the mistakes I had made. I swore I would be a better man if I woke up. This was back in 2004, 2005, and my life has never been better since. Next story. So, I was put into a coma after being thrown headfirst off a bicycle and landing on the road headfirst. Initially, I simply felt like I had a sore head, but over the next 25 minutes, I started to feel drunker and drunker. I was taken to a local surgery where the clerk questioned whether I was on drugs due to me playing with the kids' toys in the waiting room and acting in an increasingly juvenile manner. Apparently, what was really happening was a huge amount of bleeding was going inside of my skull, and my brain was shutting down more and more, and my brain functions were trying to protect me. At this time, it hit critical flooding, and I suddenly started to have epileptic shock, something I haven't had prior to this. At this point, I believe I lost consciousness and was admitted to hospital. That evening, I was given a CAT scan by a tired and unfocused worker who managed to totally miss the internal bleeding. As such, I was left overnight with the bleeding continuing, leaving me at risk of my brain being pushed back onto my spinal cord and causing me to either die or be paralyzed from the neck down. Luckily, something with my body managed to dissipate the pressure with external assistance, and I spent the next 2 weeks in a controlled coma. During this time, I remember my mother's voice and a general sense of hospital atmosphere. muffled announcements, the sounds of privacy curtains being pulled to and fro, etc. When I woke up, I was still very confused, but as my father is a doctor, he was able to discharge me into his care. I had very wide double vision for 2 days afterwards. I also had very distorted time perception, feeling that days passed in 10 minutes. I also remember staring at my parents for about 8 hours straight, fascinated and confused by it in equal measure. It was like everything was slightly unknown and required great scrutiny. After a few weeks, I had both my vision and time perception back, and most of my memories. Those closest to the accident took much longer to return, and I finally remembered the moment of flying off the handlebars a full year later, and my futile attempts to get my hands up in front of my head before I hit the deck. It was a crazy experience, but I consider myself very lucky to have had a front row seat to my brain having to almost restart itself and the systems it relies upon. Hope that was interesting for you guys. I was out for 2. Next story. I've answered this before, but the answer partly terrifying, partly amusing. I remember feeling trapped in a nightmare world. Think of John Carpenter, but with a Tim Burton aesthetic. In this world, I was being tortured by monsters. This is where I imagine I was initially hooked up to life support and resuscitated. After things got better, I had amazing time in a fantasy world and spent what my brain remembers as about 3 months in an RAF hangar in World War II as a nurse. When I woke up, it turns out my dad had been reading Brandon Sanderson books while I was under, and my now, but not at the time, girlfriend had been reading a book on RAF during nursing the war. I also asked about my sister's new kitten when I eventually became lucid. This was odd because no one had mentioned it except my sister's housemate when she came to visit me during the coma. After that experience, I tell people to be careful what they say around coma patients because you don't know what they'll pick up on or how it will affect them. Next story. I have not been in a coma myself, but you can watch Claire Wineland's video about being in a coma. A short summary, she could hear what people were saying, and from what I've gathered, her dreams were also connected to what was happening. She once mentioned dreaming about Alaska, and that they at the time had put ice bags, I think it was, on her feet. She also dreamed about being upside down, and when they changed her bed's position, that's when it happened. She could also talk to the people in her dreams and actually thought she was, but she wasn't in reality. Next story. My mom had a drug overdose. When the paramedics found her, she was 3 days in with very shallow airflow. In the hospital, the doctors had to put her into a medically induced coma. I hardly left her room. 3 weeks in, I sang her a song that she had made up and used to sing to me when I would get sick as a little girl. She would rub my belly and make believe that I had a Buddha belly, singing, "I wish I had a watermelon, I wish I had a watermelon," or even a cantaloupe, and then change the direction of my belly rub. It never made sense, but it always made me giggle, and it made me feel better. When I did this to her, tears came from her closed eyes. After 5 weeks, she came out of her coma. She had no memory of anything that happened during or before the coma. It didn't matter to me, though. I know that during that coma, she could hear me. I have no doubt about it. Then, another thing. Her boyfriend came to visit her and started making a scene. He was loud and super disruptive. Her blood pressure shot up during that encounter, another reason that I am totally convinced they are somehow involuntarily aware. Next story. I was in a coma for just about 30 days in the beginning of 2017. I was being heavily medicated at the time with strong sedatives, propofol, hydromorphone, oxidone, and fentanyl. Before the coma, I was on these medications for pain from falling 18 feet on a roof and breaking my back in 2011, but the coma, it very much felt like a dream that was either very relaxing or extremely hectic and filled with anxiety. At one point, I was laying on a bed in what seemed like a very large mansion where the walls doubled as TVs. I could control this simply with my mind, but could not move at all. I only remember snippets of this. Then, for the bad part, at one point in the coma, I had a very high fever and was kept under an ice blanket, which turned my dreaming mindset into chaos. I felt like I couldn't breathe and was fighting to stay alive. At one point, I felt like myself and others were stuck on a sheet on ice in water and being rescued by FNDY. Keep in mind, I had no idea I was in a coma. Woke up at the end of February with no memory loss, only muscle atrophy. Next story. I was put into an induced coma after a severe head injury. It was the single most terrifying experience of my life. The coma itself was simply nothingness. I didn't remember the accident, still don't really. I remember going to bed in my motel room. I woke up in agonizing pain in a dark room tied to a bed. The only man I saw was this creepy towny dude taking me somewhere. I couldn't ask him what happened or where I was because my jaw was wired shut. Not that I understood that at the time. He tried to reassure me everything was okay, but the dude was weird enough that his reassurance only served to cause me to panic even more. He told me I would have to try some of his famous chili that I totally didn't think I was about to become a part of. They stuck me back in a tiny, dark room and I fell asleep or was medicated again. Then I woke up in another tiny, dark room. It felt like a closet. I started crying, screaming my brains out with a wired jaw, absolutely devastated that the last thing I remembered was this effing nightmare. And I was still in it. I was now sure that I had been abducted and they were experimenting on me. It was not as though anyone told me I was in the hospital. All I had seen was something straight out of American Horror Story, and I was suddenly living it. I lived like that for 4 days after they took me out of the coma. I'd given up hope. I was in hell. I would have killed for a single sip of water, but hey, I haven't drank or eaten since I've been there. This must be a dream, right? Then one time, I came to, and it was a little brighter, and my wife was sitting by the bed holding my hand. She had been 1,000 miles away while I was traveling for work. But what had actually happened was, I had been found broken on the concrete, dying, and without any of my possessions. No ID, no credit cards, no phone. I was a John Doe, and coincidentally, I'd only been awake in the ICU at night these last few days. I still don't know how they eventually identified me and contacted my family. Larry, the orderly, if you're reading this, I'm sorry for the things about doing to you in order to escape. I hope you get your food truck, but I'm never going back to that city to try it. Thanks for letting me share, guys. I've found this rather therapeutic. Next story. I was in a coma for a brief stint after a car wreck over 20 years ago. My earliest memory is laying in the hospital bed, moving my hands and wondering why I couldn't get them to move at the same speed and rhythm. My dad was an avid video guy, and he filmed most of my recovery in the hospital. He recorded me the first time my family was able to speak with me after I awoke. I was telling them I had been riding in the backseat of a taxi cab, and the driver kept asking me questions. Then he stopped and asked if I wanted him to take me back to my family or go meet new people. I told him, take me home, and I woke. I don't remember any of that, but I have seen myself reciting it on video. Next story. I knew a guy who was in a car accident and he was in a coma for a few weeks. He lost all memory of about 6 weeks before the accident, including that his girlfriend had broken up with him. To her credit, she was there for him while he was in the coma, but then when he woke up, she had to go through the breakup conversation again, several more times. He ended up having memory problems after the accident where he wouldn't remember conversations or people that he had previously known. Those memory issues lasted for years, but eventually subsided. Next story. A friend was in a bad accident when she was 6 months pregnant and in a coma for several weeks. Her baby was delivered, a little premature but healthy, while she was out. I think her recovery was really gradual. She woke up, but she was more vegetative than not for a while. She did months of inpatient rehab and had to relearn how to walk. She says she lost all of her memories from the 2 years prior to her accident and several weeks after waking up. It's been 5 years now and she's doing a lot better. She can take care of her kid and she drives and walks and does volunteer work, but doesn't have the same stamina to work long shifts, so she hasn't gone back to work. I guess this is more about TBI than her coma, but she says she doesn't have any memory of that time. Next story. I was in an induced coma for about a month in between surgeries while fighting spinal osteomyelitis. I ended up with a 7-level cervical fusion from C2 to T2. The coma itself felt literally like I blinked and it was a month later. My mom came by every single day to visit me in the ICU. She read my favorite books to me and prayed while I comaed. I remember not one thought nor any occurrence, no presence, nothing. It was like I blinked and a month was gone. It didn't even feel like the passage of time you're aware of when you sleep at night and wake up in the morning. I do remember some of the myriad of hallucinations I had when they woke me up, which were incredibly ridiculous, ranging from my mom getting into a fight, terrible story, but it was all a hallucination, a fight to a huge inflatable NFL referee. And it wasn't even football season, to thinking the doctors were trying to talk to me through a speaker in my hospital room. I am happy to report that I've made a full recovery, learned how to walk, talk, and eat all from scratch, but now my only lasting sign of this ordeal is a scar and limited ROM for my neck. That's range of motion. But I'm physically active, do yoga, and have overcame the crippling opiate addiction that followed my year in the hospital. And P.S., I did clinically die in the recovery room after the last surgery for a few minutes, and had a near-death experience that was completely the opposite of when I was in the coma, but that story is for another day. And P.S.S., this was my first ever post. Next story. I was in a medically induced coma for 15 days, so I could be on heavy-duty life support. It was a nightmarish experience thinking back on it, but at the time, I just thought it was real life. I kept going through choose-your-own-adventure type scenarios where things would get progressively worse, like burning alive, having my husband or newborn child go missing, talking to the ghosts of family who weren't currently dead. These horrible things I find out were related to things happening to me, like an extremely high temperature, burning alive, my newborn missing, she was at a different hospital to me and I didn't meet her until I woke from my coma, etc. Next story. 3 weeks of medically induced coma for me. Had pneumonia, which developed into ARDS, and I ended up being carried through the window by firemen and put into an ambulance and rushed to the hospital. This happened in October last year, but I don't remember anything from after end of July. My girlfriend woke up to me making wheezing noises and I was unresponsive and stopped breathing, called the ambulance. I only remember what I've been told, and I had at first a bad throat infection, and it spread to my lungs, etc. I had gotten antibiotics, but I guess it wasn't enough. I woke up 2 times during the medically induced coma and had an epilepsy seizure because of acute benzodiazepine withdrawal, which I was addicted to. Got put back under, and after 3 weeks total, I woke up without a new seizure. I woke up still in benzo withdrawal, but they had finally given me a daily dose of 2 milligrams alprazolam spread through the day. I was tied down by my arms because I had tried to rip out all the wires in my breathing tube, and I cannot describe the terror of waking up in benzo WD and tied down, not knowing where you are and why. I also couldn't speak because of the tube in my mouth. I had nightmares during the coma in which I was always hot and sweaty. I had high fever still when I woke up. Also, in my dreams, I remember being so frustrated that I couldn't move. I also died twice in my dreams, and I wonder if it means I came close in real life. I also remember being terrified of a nurse when I woke up because he reminded me of the guy that tied me down in my dream. I remember my mother singing to me in my dream. I thought I had won the lottery, a gold medal in diving at the Olympics, and having a baby with my girlfriend. All untrue. I could keep on writing about how effing awful it all was, but you get the gist. Next story. I had a traumatic brain injury contusion in 2017 because a car hit me going 40 while I was walking across the street. It was my right of way to walk, but it was a hit and run, so it was the driver's mistake for not stopping. I was induced for a coma for 3 months, and it was almost like you were in the most vivid dream for an extreme amount of time. I can recall almost everything the dream consisted of because it was so vivid and detailed. There were dreams that consisted of me in the middle of a brewery, not being able to move while laying down on the ground when everyone else was drinking, and didn't even know I was there. This would go on forever until I would somehow be switching to another dream. One of those other dreams was me in a restaurant, sitting on a chair in a kitchen, watching all the chefs cook. I couldn't move, and people would just put things on top of me like aprons, pots, pans, etc. And it was just a dream that went on forever. The worst dream I had in the induced coma was when I was in a huge house in the city somewhere, and I walked in to try and go upstairs. When I went to the stairs, I looked back, and there were 2 people behind me mirroring every movement I made as I went up the steps. I didn't understand why they were doing it, and they wouldn't answer my questions or say anything to me. Once I got upstairs, I went into the bathroom shower that had no curtains, and I just stood there. Well, these 2 people just stared at me as the shower wasn't even on, and my clothes weren't even off. This part of the dream went on for a really long time, and I couldn't move as these 2 people just stared at me. After that dream, I was put into a new dream where I was sitting on a hospital bed that was in the middle of a huge basement that had very little lights, as if it was a basement for an underground secret research facility that had very little lighting. Nothing happened in this dream other than the fact that I didn't move. The next thing I know, I wake up from this dream to my mother and uncle letting me know I was in a coma for a long time because of this brain contusion. I immediately tried to get up and leave or try to go to the bathroom, but I couldn't because I was so weak and fragile that I couldn't even get up. My body was so skinny that my legs couldn't even sustain me to even walk. So at the point, I just laid down and tried to itch my neck, but couldn't because I had breathing tubes in my neck, trachea, and a feeding tube in my stomach and tubes all around my back and arms. And at this point, I realized my life had been turned upside down while I watched Wolf Blitzer talk about George Papadopoulos being indicted for lying to the FBI. I laugh now because you basically wake up from a massive vivid dream that went on forever to your life changing in a blink of an eye when you wake up. And the reason I laugh is because everything is all good now. I went to rehab for a full year. I'm back to my old insurance underwriting job, got a promotion, and never looked back. It was just a huge change in my life that I never expected to happen. Things are better now than they were before the accident, so I couldn't be more happier. The key to recovering from a traumatic brain injury is to not drink alcohol for 2 years. This sounds crazy, but alcohol negates brain injury recovery and will keep you from not progressing. not drinking alcohol has saved my life. And sorry for such a long post. Sometimes people who have this injury need to know that you can always overcome a brain injury that ruined your life. You just need to never stop progressing at rehab. Always know you can persevere from this injury if you put your whole life into it. Always go to rehab. Never quit, even though it sucks so bad. If you quit rehabilitation, you will never fully recover. Always keep moving and never let people doubt you. You will win this game if you don't stop working to recover yourself. Next story. I was in a coma for about a month a few years ago. I missed Easter that year. You take things for granted until you miss something that you always remembered having experienced. My last thoughts was the doctor had done something wrong and I was drowning all of a sudden. I was misdiagnosed for months and ended up going into the hospital with quadruple pneumonia. I thought by that time that maybe I had pneumonia, but had no clue how bad it was. I was in the back gasping for air, hooked to an oxygen machine, and they decided to give me fluids to raise my heart rate, not realizing I had a bad heart condition and was retaining a huge amount of fluid that I didn't realize. So I get this suffocating feeling and fade to black. I remember drifting farther away from my body than I had ever gone. I was so peaceful and pleasant, and months of just fighting to stay alive, it was just such a relief to go through that. I was floating so far and felt like I was about to pass over to whatever is beyond, and all of a sudden, a thought like a spike hit me, and I wondered about what my son would think. I couldn't leave him like this. So I clinched and made myself stop moving further away from my body. I pushed through the darkness towards a pinhole of light. Eventually, there was faint shapes and textures, then life and sound started creeping in slowly too. Then everything kind of faded into focus. My family said I had been awake almost a day before all of a sudden it seemed to them I was suddenly there in the room and aware of where I was. Comas suck ass. I lost 70 plus pounds and had to relearn how to walk and be myself again. Steve Seagal and the bride lied. You don't just shake that crap off and all of a sudden you're okay. It takes weeks to feel semi-normal again. Next story. Traumatic brain injury due to a skiing accident during a work outing. Comatose for 4 days. I literally don't remember the flight to Austria, the first night in the hotel, nor the skiing part, nor the accident, nor the month that followed. I have photos of it, and that's it. I remember absolutely nothing. Traumatic injuries to the brain tend to do that, make you forget things. I'm guessing it has to do with which region of the brain is damaged. The upsides, though, it got me off of work, fully paid for 6 months, then 6 months or reintegrating, starting 4 hours a week up to 40. Work insurance paid out about $10,000 just because. I now work 32 hours a week at max and get the remaining 8 hours a week paid out by my insurance. I got to fly a helicopter, but I don't remember that part. And basically, I got out of the ordeal wealthier than when I got in. European health insurances are pretty amazing. I looked up the costs they made, about 40,000 euros, except for my own deductible, 375 annually, and monthly fee that everybody pays of 100 euros. So I paid basically nothing. In the USA, I'd be homeless and bankrupt, I'm guessing.
Okay, OP, listen here. You and your European rich ass can just stay over there, all right? I don't need people insulting my country's health insurance system because I don't need people to remind me of our health insurance system. He's right. OP's right. The insurance companies, they hate you. Hold on, sir. What do you mean you need to take out an insurance claim? We don't do that here. Yes, this is Geico, but we don't do that. And then there's Canada above us, just living superior in many ways. Anyway, next story.
So, my story doesn't have as many revelations as many of the other ones, but I had a bout of seizures when I was going through chemotherapy treatment when I was 17. The seizures put me in a coma, and I remember being lucid, but only bits and pieces of it are really clear. A few memories I have was 1. The doctors telling my family that the cancer may have spread to my brain. 2. My sister crying and telling me that I have a freezer full of popsicles waiting for me when I wake up. You see, mouth sores are a B word, and I was on a popsicle diet for a few weeks prior to the coma. And 3, I remember just a whole lot of nothing, but not nothing like you have when you're sleeping. To me, it was like I was awake, but just engulfed in nothingness. Think of sitting in a white room, being blinded, but also knowing you're not in any physical form of your body. I don't talk about it much. I'd like to think that my brain knew I wasn't dying, and that's why I was in this state of nothingness for a week. Next story. I was in a medically induced coma for several months after a car accident. I don't remember much, but I do recall coming out of the coma briefly a few times. The first time I started flailing around and had to be tied back down to the bed, I was put back to sleep. A second time I woke to see some of my organs out on trays sitting on my body, still attached but just being held out of the way. I also had a dream about being locked to a couch in Cuba and could only watch TV in Spanish, I think it was. I say locked because I was able to get up and move, but only to a certain distance. Like after 10 feet, I'd hit an imaginary wall. Like when in a video game you reach the end of the map. Next story. Back in 2009, my grandfather had kidney failure and fell into a coma for 6 months before passing away. When we would visit him sometimes, his step-grandkids would be there and they were loud. My mom, she used to be a nurse and would take care of him while we were there. Anyways, one day we were there and the step-grandkids were too. And my mom kept telling them to shut up because he could still hear them and they might be hurting his ears. So they decided to get louder and louder at that. And my grandfather let out a really angry grunting sound. And the kids shut up right away and would only whisper near him after that. Next story. I was in a coma for 2 weeks last spring/summer. I remember texting my work that I wasn't coming in because I was sick. Then I fell asleep and woke up 2 weeks later, unable to move because my muscles had shriveled away and my hands were in fists. I couldn't even turn over. I had a dream that I was like trapped in a mask. I can't picture it, sort of like a pointy mask, and I was in a formal gown. I was walking around town trying to get it off. At one point, I was sort of unable to move and kept trying to take the mask off. At one point, I was at my sister's friend's wedding, but I was on a bed with a nurse next to me. I remember my sister told me she painted my toenails. Remember dreaming about it, and I was confused as to why I was in bed and couldn't go to the wedding. I was on like a step pyramid outside, and my dad showed me a piece of paper and said, "Someone has to pay for what happened." I had been on a ventilator and kept trying to take it out apparently, and they did restrain me at some point. I also said, "Get this the hell out," or something like that. My friend said she was excited when that happened because my personality was coming back. Another friend said that when she talked to me, I would look at her and furrow my brow like I was sad, upset. And my sister, she did paint my toenails, and it was weird when I noticed. I was like, I dreamed that! I remember being in a really dark room when I woke up and not being able to move. I was in the hospital for 1 more week, 3 total, and out of ICU for the last 3 nights, I think. My memory of hospital time and beginning of rehab time, it's hazy. I generally don't remember it. I was in rehab for 5 weeks. I do have some mild TBI symptoms like poor attention/concentration, which wasn't that great in the first place. I get confused easily, and I have a really hard time translating my thoughts into English words that people can understand. It's frustrating. I am able to walk now, though, although my nerves are still regrowing, so I can't flex my foot properly yet, and my hands are still recovering. I'm working on the tendons or whatever. The rest of me has recovered from all my wounds. I just have a bunch of scars now, including a giant one on my face. I went through an F-ton of crap last summer, but I'm okay now. I hope this isn't too far down that nobody can read it. Next story. My brother-in-law was in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks after a sudden and serious health complication. Initially, he was just heavily sedated. The day I visited him with my sister, every 20 minutes or so he would sort of stir, sit up, yank at his IV and wires frantically, and then lay back down and pass out, over and over. They ended up having to put him in the coma to prevent him from doing this, as it would sometimes be quite frantic. He eventually recovered and came home and told a story of how he lived an entirely different life the whole time he was out. He was a soldier in a war where their greatest weapon was a cat and a box on his chest. And when they engaged the weapon, the cat would be released and shoot its own little gun or something like that. There was more, but I can't recall all of the details. Also, a coworker was in a coma after serious complications with influenza last year. She also claims to have lived a whole life while she was out, was devastated when she woke up to discover that she hadn't been on vacation in Hawaii with her daughter the whole time. Next story. It was my now husband, then boyfriend, who was in a coma for 5 days after a really bad boating accident. The doctor said it was a 50-50 chance of him coming out totally fine and him not being the same. What he remembers, quote, is, "I don't remember the accident, but I remember the day at the lake. I remember the rescue boat and the helicopter, but I don't remember the hospital. And I kind of woke up, I don't know, but I could hear you talking. I could hear my mom, and I could hear my doctor. I also remember one time waking up and hearing you singing to me, and I knew I had to wake up for real because you used to be so nervous about your voice, and you never sang to me on purpose." Next story. Not me, but a few years ago, someone in my class just stopped showing up to school with no context. They never said anything about leaving or moving, etc. Anytime anyone would ask, the teachers would just say they didn't know, but you could tell by their voice and face there was more. The kid was never taken off the attendance list, which was odd. We didn't know what happened. About 3 months later, some people kind of forgot about him. Then he just showed up. Everyone asked him what happened, and he said that he was in a coma for about 3 weeks to a month, and the rest of the time he was in recovery or something, I don't remember. He never really seemed like he wanted to talk about it, so everyone kind of backed off after a few days. The most I learned was there was some sort of accident on his way home from school that day. I never figured out what happened though, but my best guess is a crash, but there wasn't any crash reports in the area. I guess I'll never know. He also seemed completely normal except for some anxiety, bad memory, and some normal coma stuff that I'm assuming.
Y'all, this one has flown by. It has been miraculous, magical, mystical, spiritual, slightly religious, and just a little bit gay. I won't explain that last part. I'm joking, y'all. Maybe it is gay if you want it to be. I don't know. But guys, like I said before, I've never been in a coma. If you've had a coma, please feel free to share in the comments below. You know I'm always down there replying to comments from time to time. I read it. I read those comments because I love Undersparked, and we're so back. Again, you know, sometimes we leave, but then we come back. We always come back. We can't be killed, y'all, okay? We will reach a bajillion subscribers. There will be face reveals every single day of the week for the rest of time. I don't know what I'm saying. But anyway, I'm just happy. I'm happy, and this was a fun video to read. But guys, we're at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting, and have a good one. Bye-bye.